All right, you can begin.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our presentation on Leading with Integrity and Moral Purpose, a chapter summary presentation from Exploring Leadership by Kumais, Lucas, and McMahon. This evening, your presenters are Ciara Hines and myself, CRN Superville. Here are our learning objectives. By the end of this presentation, you should be able to define integrity, moral purpose, and moral courage. You should be able to explain how ethical environments are created and distinguish between unethical or toxic leadership and ethical leadership. We'll also look at real life cases, including Enron whistleblowing, and even watch a short video on ethical dilemmas at the top. Here we have our chapter overview. This chapter includes a discussion of the process of creating and sustaining ethical organizational environments. It also includes an analysis of the moral dimensions of transforming leadership theory and an examination of the ethical influences that participants have on their organizations through behavior modeling. As we move through the slides, I want you to keep in mind, how does moral purpose guide everyday decisions? So as we proceed, keep in mind, how does moral purpose guide everyday decisions? Integrity and moral purpose. Integrity means that you must be honest and you must act according to one's values, even when no one is watching. You must also be consistent in doing what is right. Moral purpose, on the other hand, is the motivation to do what's right. So even though you have integrity, you must also have that motivation to do what is right for greater good, not just for your own personal success, but for the success of all and sundry. Leaders who embody these qualities are usually very, very effective, and they inspire others to follow along that same path. So here's a question. I want to know, why do some people trust some leaders more than they trust other leaders? If anyone would like to answer.
They have a history of telling the truth. And unlike a certain president that is say one thing and then turn and say he never said anything, even though we have documented proof that he did say it.
Okay. Anybody else would like to share?
Yeah, I think people like familiarity.
Familiarity. Okay. And I like one more, please. Okay, well, we'll take that. So some leaders are trusted more than other leaders. So as we go along, you all are not wrong, but as we go along, we will see why some leaders are trusted more than others. Next slide, please. Here's our introduction to ethical leadership. As a leader, you will often face ethical dilemmas, from just small, basic daily decisions to even large organizational challenges. And it takes integrity and moral purpose right? That needs to be central to leadership because it builds trust, respect, and credibility. Usually, without integrity, leaders cannot inspire or they cannot sustain organizational goals. Maybe you might have some success, but it would not really be sound or long term. Next slide, please. So here we are looking at why integrity matters. Why integrity matters. So we say that integrity matters because it builds trust, credibility, and respect. When we do not have integrity within an organization, even the best of leaders, they tend to fail. I will just make mention of the Enron case. We will discuss this later on as the presentation proceeds. And when integrity is present, leaders can inspire others. When we look at Nelson Mandela, who we will talk about later on, he also was a leader with integrity, right? And integrity is not only about avoiding doing the wrong things, it is also about actively doing what's right, regardless of the conditions, right? So, what I want you to think of right now is a leader, whether it's in your home or at your work, or maybe in the country, or a lecturer, or whoever it is. Think of a leader you admire. What values that they have make them trustworthy? Anybody would like to share either in the chat or you can put on your mic and answer. What values a leader that you admire has that make them trustworthy, that make you want to say, this leader, I could trust this person. I could really follow this man, or I could follow this woman blindly.
Hi, good evening. So this is Sydney. For me,
Mhm.
I would say recently I would have looked at a leader at my company where I work. She is the branch head of one of our branches. And for me, what I find made me feel able to connect with her and look at her as a proud leader is the fact that she's always willing to help and correct you. So if you make a mistake, rather than she embarrasses you or make you feel like you're stupid, she tries to help you and show you ways to do things and get it done properly. So that's for me.
Good. Anybody else? Okay. So we're going on to the next slide. And the next slide, I want a little more interaction because I'm going to talk about two scenarios. And this slide is entitled, What Should I Do? You being in certain situations, would you act ethically or unethically? So one of the situations is, think about COSTAT here. So you are in charge of the elections committee here at COSTAT. Your good friend, your best friend, the one who you're always riding with when you're if only in the same class, you're asking the lecturer to pair you with that person because you and them are real good. Right? So he or she decides to run for vice president in the election. But there's a criteria that says that you must have a certain minimum grade point average in order to run for this position. But your friend not doing so good. But there's a form to fill out which says that, yes, I doing good and my grade point average is up to par, so I can run for this specific position. And your friend with a very, very bad GPA, fill out this form and put on it that, they're doing really well and, they're capable of handling the position. And they know in times gone by, people done it and they were able to get through. Because nobody ain't really going to check and see if this person's GPA is really up to standard for this position. I would like to know, you being the head of this committee, what would you do knowing that your friend is not eligible to run for this position? And keep that in mind. And our next situation here is where we have another group. Let's use COSTAT because we are here studying. We have a group of students who come together. Let's call them a student support committee. And they say they are doing philanthropic work or, charity work. So they decide that they are going to collect funds, collect donations, and they would be giving it to a cancer patient to do surgery or to do whatever test that needs to be done on the patient. And one of the members, who is a lecturer's daughter, you see this member who she was responsible for collecting the funds. She took some of the funds and she pocketed. And not only did she pocket it, she took it and she bought a case of beers with it to go to a lime. What would you do in these situations? So, anybody, if you would like to share, if you are placed in such dilemmas, what would you do?
Hi, this is Nakia. Um, Back the first situation with the girl's best friend, I believe. Honestly, if you are really her friend, I think as a young lady before, I think it was Sydney was saying, I think personally I would pull you aside and have a private conversation and really let you know, like, this really not going to work. I don't think you should go through it because if you yourself know that your grade's not up to par, you can't depend on my position to save you. So being a friend, I would really tell you, up these studies and then you could, pursue something like that. Because even if you back her up and she goes in there with a bad grade, later down it would catch up with her and eventually you would also take the fall for it. So I think it's important to really speak up, even if it hurts the person's feelings, respectfully let them know what you're doing is wrong.
Right, I like that. I like that. Anybody else would like to give their take? I feel everybody else in here would encourage her to go still because you will be covering for them because you remember you is the head of the committee and that your friend. So you will be covering so nobody wouldn't find out. I don't want to believe we have all these unethical people in here. So at least one more person could tell me what you would do in either of these situations if you were placed in it. All right, nobody. Okay, so even though these situations may seem small or it may seem petty, these are the kind of things that reflect, your moral choices. And sometimes we as students or even the professionals are faced with things like this. And, it doesn't become unethical when it becomes a large or on a big scale. It starts even from small. So if you could recognize that something is amiss, so something is not ethical, it is up to you as an individual, if you are in a position of leadership or even not in a position of leadership, to point it out and say, you know what, hey, this can't work here. All right, because even the smallest things does contribute to a greater problem. Right, so we go into the next slide. So this slide is just telling us, if you're a leader, why it is important for you to think before you just rush in and say, well, okay, this is what I'm going to do. Take some time to reflect think about what the situation really is, and think about what could be the outcome. You're not thinking about just today. You need to be a visionary as a leader and see how your decisions or your lack of decisions could affect your organization or persons around you, right? So, we shouldn't rush decisions because when you often ignore it, you have ethical implications. Leaders must slow down and reflect before acting on ethical dilemmas to avoid impulsive or self-serving choices, okay? Consequentially, when you have quick fixes, it could ignore root ethical issues or reflective pauses. It can allow inclusion of diverse views. So when you pause, you might have an employee who is underneath you, or you raise your issues with your employees who could say, well, this is my view. This is what I think. This is my take. All right. And relational leadership also helps balance process and integrity. And including group members in ethical reflection empowers others and leads to better decisions. So when your leader considering what you have to say, just like I think Sydney was saying that, her leader does correct her and set her on the right path without making her feel less than. So, when you include your smaller workers or the ones below you, it shows that you value their opinion, you value their presence, you value their input in the organization, which could lead to greater success, right? So reflection isn't weakness. It's a leader showing that, they have wisdom in that case. All right, so we're moving on to the next slide where we look at 4 qualities for ethical leaders. What are some of the qualities that ethical leaders possess? All right, so this is by an author called Laura Nash. And she says that, these qualities help people to advance ethical standards in any organization, right? So we're starting with critical thinking skills. This is the ability to analyze ethical components of a problem. So this means like, you're slowing down and you're asking yourself, what values are at stake here, right? So you're not just running into anything and you're just saying, you're making decisions, as the Trinidadians will say, Viki Vi. You're taking your time, you're looking at the pros and the cons of a situation, and then you're making decisions accordingly. Another quality is integrity. You have to stand up for your personal and professional ethics, even when it is uncomfortable. Because as a leader, it wouldn't be a walk in the park. You will have people coming against you. And sometimes you might make decisions that people coming against, but you have to know what is the right thing regardless and stand up for that and go with that decision no matter what. Right? And as we looked at earlier, we said integrity is to be honest. And it also means to be consistent between your values and your behavior. So you can't say um, you value honesty, but yet you're here lying to the workers and telling them all kind of nasty stories that don't align with your values. So both must align. What you're doing and what you're saying must go hand in hand. All right. And then we also have empathy and perspective taking. This is the ability to see a situation from another person's point of view. So if your worker come to tell you, um, you say, here what you say, are changing the working hours to just like that on short notice. From you usually work 8 to 4, are changing it from 8 to 6. And you just didn't take other people's situations into consideration. You need to look at how that might impact. You might have workers who have children going to school and all these different things. So you just can't run in with any decision without factoring these things. Another one is personal motivation again, which we talked about before. To do the right thing, you must always possess that hunger. and the desire to do the right thing, not just to do it because you gain money or some kind of great reward, but you're doing it because it is the right thing to do. Within yourself, this is the right thing to do, and you're functioning, doing the right thing all the time. All right? So next slide, please. All right, so here we are going to talk about creating ethical environments. How can we create an environment that is ethics based, that is ethics centered? Okay, so right, so we are looking at this is one of the practical sections of this chapter, right? We are looking at how to create and sustain an ethical environment within any group or organization here, right? And it says that ethics in leadership is not accidental. You have to be intentional about following through with your ethics. And ethical environments only emerge when leaders and members alike commit to shared values. You have to have open communication and moral accountability. We see in the chapter where Rushworth Kidder reminds us that organizations don't become unethical overnight, just like I was saying before. You know, when unethical things happen, it'll start from since the small little decisions that you might overlook or think that just a little petty thing, man. We could let that bypass. So you have to be practicing being ethical, even in the small things that you might say ain't really valuable, right? So it doesn't happen overnight. It happens when people start taking small shortcut and nobody ain't saying nothing. Everybody just watching. So it is essential for everyone in the organization, not just your leaders alone, to take responsibility for the moral climate of the organization. Right? So you have to push for ethics, and it doesn't always be something easy to take place, right? You might face resistance, you might get criticism, you might get all kind of different things because not everybody will believe what you believe and do whatever. But you have to have that personal courage, again, to do the right thing, to steer the organization on the right path, to be ethical regardless of what the outcome is, right? So you have to share the core values with your workers. You cannot have your ethics dependent just on the leader alone. You have to reward people who are doing very good ethical acts, right? And you have to have accountability because it builds that integrity. You must also involve your members in what is going on. And you must handle violations fairly, but also privately. Don't see violations and overlook it and say, well, all right, somehow that would disappear or is okay because it's something just small, or however the case may be. You need to attack it head on in order to have an ethical environment conducive for a successful organization. Next slide, please. On this slide, we have an example of two persons here who we will call unethical leaders. I know we didn't reach there yet, but we are talking about what happens when we don't have a proper ethical environment. We look at a lady, Martha Stewart. I'm sure many of us heard of her before. Martha Stewart, she's the CEO of Omni Living, and she damaged her company over cover up of insider trading. And she had a federal prison sentence, right? So you could see where you and she is the CEO, when you're covering up these things, how it could cause not just your own life to crumble, but the life of others. Sometimes you might cause the whole organization to become, no more. All right. And then on the other hand, we look at Mr. Kenley. He was the CEO of Enron. I don't know if you all ever heard of Enron before, right? And what he did is he duped shareholders and others, and he destroyed his company. And he died sometime, I think, in July 2006. But just before he died, this man, Mr. Kenley, you see on your screen here, he was convicted of conspiracy and fraud. And he faced a maximum sentence of 45 years in prison on those charges of duping out his shareholders. And then he was also given another 120 years for another case, right? So this is how, when we don't have a proper ethical environment, or we don't have leaders who practice ethics, these are the kind of implications it can have. All right. So on the next slide here now, we will be talking about ethical leaders versus unethical leadership, right? And unethical leadership, we will also refer to it as being toxic. Okay? Right? So we're talking about the contrasting forms of leadership, ethical and unethical or toxic leadership, right? And this was one of the most eye-opening parts of the chapter. You know why? Because it reminds us that not all leadership is good leadership. Not because you have somebody in a leadership position means that they would be leading, effectively or leading ethically, right? So it says that ethical leaders, they act with integrity, fairness, and respect, and they promote shared accountability and moral courage. And we reference here Nelson Mandela. And unethical leaders, on the other hand, they exploit power, they manipulate followers, and they pursue self-interest. And when they pursue their self-interest, that is at the expense of others. So here we see in where leaders, you cannot be selfish. You have to take into account other people as well. And we know at unethical leaders, we look back at the two examples we just had here, Miss Martha Stewart and Mr. Kenley, who had severe implications at the end of functioning unethically. All right. And we go to the next slide. So we're looking at some of the qualities that ethical leaders may possess, right? So they model transparency. They reward ethical actions. They encourage moral talk. So I want you to keep that moral talk in mind. We'll look at that a little later down in the presentation. And they also foster climates where doing right outweighs being popular. So they don't care about being popular. They don't care about being liked. What they care about is encouraging the correct thing within the organization, maintaining an ethical environment so that this organization could not only be successful but could thrive. Because with unethical leaders, we could have success, but success is usually very temporary. And again, we look at Martha Stewart and Kenley, right? So some of the qualities of unethical leaders are they leave their followers worse off than they found them, and they violate basic standards of human rights, and they don't care about others, right? They don't care about people usually, and they consciously feed their followers illusion that make the leader feels powerful. They make them feel powerful. They even call them egotistic at times. All right. They also mislead followers through deliberate untruths and misdiagnosis of issues and problems. So they might cover up things, they go tell a little lie here and there. They might use fear tactics, fear mongering, and all these different things, right? And they also have an insatiable ambition that prompts leaders to put their own power, glory, and fortunes above their followers' well-being. So, in other words, we could always see that they're selfish. All they care about is the self, and they're thinking about rewards. They ain't thinking about nothing else. It also says that they're coward and they're very reckless, right? So, based on what we spoke about ethical and unethical leadership, I want to know from your experience, what do you think what behaviors makes a leader toxic? What behaviors to you from your experience, either in your work or wherever?
I would say a leader that is insensitive.
Mm-hmm. Sydney, I see I was going to speak. Anybody else? If you all are too shy to come on the mic, you could always put it in the chat. What behaviors from based on what you experience makes a leader toxic or make them unethical?
For me, as a leader that you can't trust. So, for example, if you was to inform your head or your supervisor, informing them of a personal matter, and then they take that matter and discuss it with another team member or discuss it with another head that's out of your department, that's somebody you definitely can't trust. So for sure that is unethical. It makes that person toxic because you now no longer want to have that relationship with that head or be able to trust them. So you now keep things more private rather than feel free to go and have a discussion about what it is you're currently facing or going through.
Right, right. I agree. I would feel the same way too. Anybody else would like to share before we move on? Okay, so this takes us to our next slide where we look at moral purpose and moral courage. And we defined moral purpose earlier on, but we're going to talk about it again. So we say that moral purpose is the compass that keeps a leader pointed towards what is right and what is just, right? But having moral purpose is not enough. Leaders also need moral courage, which is the willingness to act on their principles, even when it's risky. Because sometimes you might have the moral purpose and otherwise. If you're brave enough to say, well, yeah, this are standing up for this regardless of what will happen. So you have to have that courage along with the purpose, right? So in the chapter, moral courage is illustrated through Sharon Watkins. Sharon Watkins is the lady you're seeing on your screen here. And earlier on, we referenced Enron. She was an executive in Enron who blew the whistle on unethical practices. You know, she wasn't thinking about her career or none of that. Because somebody might have said, oh God, if I go and tell, they might fire me or they might want to kill me or whatever the case is. All she knew is that she wanted to stand up for what was ethical, to stand up for what was right, regardless of the outcome that may happen. That. So we looking again in the chapter where they said Kidder describes moral courage as the quality of mind and spirit that enables one to face up to ethical challenges firmly and confidently without flinching or retreating. Right? And what I want to make reference here as we hear on this point of moral purpose and moral courage How many of y'all watch the news and see what's taking place between Venezuela and the USA? How many of us are aware of what is taking place between Venezuela and USA? Just put a thumbs up or a raise hand or something, just so I know you're aware of what is taking place. Right. Okay. So we're familiar with what is taking place between Venezuela and the USA. So over the last few days, I think like about 3 or 4 days ago, the Admiral, which is Mr. Alvin Halsey of the US Army in the Caribbean here in Latin America, he decided to resign. And he was not too long given the position. Reports are saying that they are uncertain as to why he resigned. But word on the ground is that he resigned because of he has taken oath to protect innocent lives. And he believes that the instruction he is being given to bomb all these boats that come in from Venezuela, because you're not sure whether these boats have drugs or whatever, he feeling as though he is taking innocent lives because you're not very certain. So he didn't say, well, okay, I get our instruction and the head here, are just going through and are just killing people as they appear on the radar, however it goes. He was looking at his moral values. He know what he stand for and what his oath is as an admiral, as the head of this army. And as the head, you could say, well, me ain't studying that. I might walk. I just to tell me do that, I doing that. But he think about what was his oath was, and he said one of his oath is to protect innocent lives, and he's feeling as though he is just killing people. And he took the stance that, you know what, I going to resign regardless of what this president might think or whoever might think, right? So now I want to ask you a question. Have you ever faced a moment when doing the right thing came with a cost? And what did you do? I see so many people rushing. I want to start to call names, right? So the question is, have you ever faced a moment when doing the right thing came with a cost? And what you did? Right. I see in Miss Sosa. Are you there?
Yes. Hi, good night.
Right. Good night.
Are you hearing me?
I'm asking, yes, I am. I'm hearing you loud and clear. My question is, have you ever faced a moment when doing the right thing came with a cost?
Um, well, ethics is always involved for me, and sometimes being quiet about the things you're doing is also important because I would share an example. I was asked to access information that was restricted because of the environment it was in. So I decided that I would absorb the project on my own and approach it from a professional standard instead of putting the staff at risk because we had two risks involved, which is risk to the staff and a risk to the organization. But the information we needed was to help the organization. So on one side, you're benefiting, you're helping the organization. On one side, you could risk the organization with HSE issues. So I decided to absorb the project and approach it professionally by putting on PPE equipment, which is mask, gloves, suit, and I scanned the records. And I was able to help the organization, not put the staff at risk, and approach it at a professional standards so that I don't put myself at risk. So I think in that situation, I was able to weigh my option in terms of addressing the risk involved and approaching it in a way that I don't put myself at risk. I hope that
Okay.
example is able to help.
Yes. So we applaud you for your effort, because you could have just simply, you say, put everybody at risk, but you did a selfless act. And I admire you for upholding your ethics in this time. So before we move on, we are going to watch a short video, not too long. And this captures what happens when leaders face ethical dilemmas at the top levels of an organization. What I want you to do is to pay attention to how these examples relates to Keda's ideas that we were discussing before on moral courage and Nash's 4 qualities for ethical leadership. All right. So just taking this short video.
What does it mean to be an effective ethical leader? It means at least 2 things. First, effective ethical leaders act ethically as an inspiration to others. No single factor has a bigger impact on the ethicality of firm culture than the personal examples set by firm leaders. Second, they communicate and manage their organization's culture so as to promote ethical action by subordinates.
Most of my managers have always been very ethical, and I've always looked up to their leadership. But one in particular stood out from the others in that she was always looking for other people's perspectives. How's this going to impact other people? What are the downstream impacts of this decision that we're going to make? And is it truly the right one for our company, for our stakeholders, and our client teams?
Professors Cropenzano and Wallumbwa have observed that most adults do not have an adequate moral compass, and therefore look outside themselves for guidance in moral dilemma situations. It is the leaders of their organizations to whom they primarily look. And studies show that few things impact the ethical climate of a firm more than the actions of their leaders. Importantly, leaders' unethical actions are copied by subordinates even more readily than their ethical actions.
When you have an unethical boss that is always trying to bend the rules or even break them, that is creating a toxic environment for everybody in the institution, because more and more people will try to do the same thing.
Although it is especially important for leaders to act ethically, they are often particularly vulnerable to acting unethically. Professors Ten Brunsell and Bazerman note that it is clear that most people have high opinions of their own character and do not realize the substantial gap between how ethical they think they are and how ethical they truly are.
Like, for example, I worked for a doctor in a small practice, and he had a very colorful personality, but he was also very unethical about a lot of things because it was just him, and he was the boss. And sometimes he would disclose really personal information about patients to other patients and to us. They think that they are overconfident that they're ethical, and really they're not, or what they're doing is not wrong. They rationalize themselves out of it anyways because, you know, for the doctor I worked for, he was a doctor, and so he did lots of good things. So it's okay that he did these things. Or, you know, he was more educated than all of us, so he knew what he was talking about, and none of us knew.
Believing that we are moral people and will automatically do moral things, many of us act with little self-reflection and thereby often make ethical mistakes. Overconfidence renders leaders particularly vulnerable because they have typically had great success in their lives. Think of Ken Lay, former CEO of Enron, minister's son, noted philanthropist, convicted felon. Or think of disgraced lobbyist Jack Abramoff, devout Jew, devoted family man, convicted felon. Another behavioral factor that particularly affects leaders is the instant entitlement bias. Studies show that if people are told that they are part of a team and that they should divide up resources allocated to the team, they tend to divide the resources equally among team members. But if they are told that they have been selected as the leader of the team, they tend to keep a much larger share of the resources for themselves.
Yay!
In real life, leaders often fall victim to the instant entitlement bias, as can be seen in the lavish lifestyles often lived by corporate bigwigs. Think of former Tyco CEO Dennis Kozlowski, who spent $2 million of company money on his wife's birthday party.
It's really easy to serve in one's self-interest when you're in a position of power.
If your decisions have always been supported and you've always been praised for being a fantastic leader and increasing the value of the firm, it could feel like you can do no wrong in the eyes of the firm. It could be hard for you to slow down and think about whether you could have made a better decision or whether the decisions you are making are truly ethical and in the best interest of the firm and your own value structure, you know, the culture of the company and your own personal values.
A study by Professors Flynn and Wiltermuth demonstrated that people at the center of social networks, such as CEOs, are more likely than others to mistakenly believe that other people agree with them regarding what is an ethical course of action. It is often shocking how top corporate officers, like WorldCom's Bernie Ebbers, and high government officials, like New York's Eliot Spitzer, come to the view that the rules that apply to everyone else do not apply to them. For example, when Ken Lay was found to have violated Enron's code of ethics by investing in a company that did more than 80% of its business with Enron, he called suggestions of impropriety form over substance. Rules, he said, are important, but you should not be a slave to rules either.
I had a boss that would always try to embezzle money and also try to force a number of young people, young volunteers in the institution to make loans with fake papers and to take the money. And he presented everything as being done for the greater good for the organization. The higher people go up the chain, the more likely they are to do illegal stuff because they think nobody's going to catch them.
Professor Dr. Keltner of the University of California at Berkeley, who studies ethical leadership, further finds that leaders are often tone deaf on ethical issues and that they have uniquely self-serving rationalizations for their unethical actions that often focus on their rights and crowd out any consideration of others' rights. As Professor Zach notes, achieving high social status appears to make it not just lonely at the top, but morally perilous as well.
And people talk about power corrupting. It doesn't have to. Only if you are not aware that your actions have consequences and networks around you, right?
You can't put a price on doing the right thing.
Realize what's important, what's moral, and question your actions to make sure that all the decisions you're making are leading to an objective that is ethical.
I think if a leader sets a tone that they've never made a mistake, they don't struggle with anything, they're perfect, then, I mean, that's not realistic. But then how can people come to them when they're feeling less than perfect?
The best leaders are the ones who acknowledge their own shortcomings, acknowledge that they do not know everything, and ask those who they serve and ask those who work for them just to fill them in on what's happening. The best companies are the ones that create a culture where the employees can voice their concerns to their bosses, really.
Okay. So this video that we just looked at, so it gave us a vivid example of how easily integrity can erode under pressure. And as you can see, they reference Kenley and the Enron scandal in there. All right. So here we are going to look at 8 assumptions about ethical leadership. The key assumptions are ethical leadership is central. Ethics, sorry, is central to leadership. Okay. And this just means that ethics isn't an add-on, it's the foundation of leadership, right? All leadership is value driven. So it assumes that every leader acts from a set of value, whether acknowledged or not. It also states that personal and organizational values intersect. So personal ethics must align with the organization's values. Because when they don't, leaders face a moral choice, right? So it also assumes that ethical leadership can be learned. Ethical maturity develops through reflection and experience. Next slide, please. Right? So it links thought with action. So you have to know what is right, because that is not enough. You also need to act on what is the right thing. Okay? And then character development, it matters. So character is built through consistent ethical action. Ethical leadership is a shared process. Leadership ethics aren't just the boss job alone. Everyone have to uphold the standards. And finally, everything we do, it teaches others. Every action, every decision, or if you make a decision or whatever it is, it teaches others what is acceptable. So these 8 assumptions remind us that leadership is always ethical work. It's also about alignment between values, actions, and relationships. Next slide. On here, we look at the cultural dimensions on ethics, right? So they say that ethics is also shaped by culture and time. So what might be moral in one place mightn't be moral in another one. So if we look at an example of, say, Saudi Arabia. So in Saudi Arabia, they might restrict women's role, and that is lawful and it is moral. But as opposed to the United States, that same practice would violate values of equality. So that mightn't be able to work in the United States, but it can work in Saudi Arabia, right? So ethical leaders must understand context before judging actions, right? And then we look at something called cultural relativism, and universal values, right? So cultural relativism, it just means that understanding actions within their culture before judging them. And then universal values is virtues like truth, fairness, courage, justice, and respect for life, right? So these values appear in all cultures, even though they are expressed differently. Okay? And there's something called the Transparency International Corruption Index, which shows that moral climates differ globally. Countries like Finland and Denmark, they score high in integrity, while others face more ethical challenges. Right? So ethical leadership, it requires balance. It can't have one without the other. You have to respect diversity while you hold firm to core human values. A good leader will ask him or herself, they wouldn't just make any decision, they will say, how can I honor cultural differences without compromising fairness or honesty? And this is what it will tend to mean to lead with moral purpose in a multicultural world, right? So ethics, even cultural, as we see here. So at this point, I will say thank you for listening to my presentation up till here. And I now pass you over to my co-presenter, Miss Ciara Hines. Thank you.
Hi, good day everyone. My name is Ciara Hanks, and today I will be presenting the second half of this presentation. To begin, I will be talking about the Transforming Leadership Theory by James McGregor Burns that was created in 1973. The central idea is that leadership is a moral process where leaders and followers raise each other to higher levels of morality and motivation. Leadership begins transforming when both leaders and participants are able to influence each other toward shared ethical goals, build relationships based on mutual respect, integrity, and purpose. Burns makes great emphasis on persuasion, mutual influence, and shared moral growth as keys to ethical leadership. A leader's ability to persuade their members is important. Not only must they make positively impactful decisions, but they must know what to say in order to persuade or convince their members to believe it will affect them positively. Mutual influence is a reciprocal or equal interaction where two or more entities or people affect each other, resulting in dynamic changes in a system. Shared moral growth is the process in which a community or members of an organization are able to collectively advance their understanding of what is right and wrong. Followers can influence leaders as well, but not as much. It is, however, a two-way ethical relationship. Now, I ask anybody here, can you think of a leader today, whether local or globally, that raises moral awareness like Burns describes? Anybody willing to answer or okay,
Yeah,
Patricia, go ahead.
it's Nakia. I would say somebody that stands out for me would be the Prime Minister of Barbados. I believe Mia Mottley. I really like how she speaks out on things.
Hmm. I agree. Okay, ethical behaviors. Ethics in daily leadership practices. Ethical behaviors means consistently acting according to one's moral values and organizational principles. It involves making choices that respect others' rights, promote fairness and accountability, and avoid harm to individuals or the community. Oh, sorry. Modeling ethical conduct. Leaders demonstrate ethics not just by what they say, but by what they do, such as keeping promises, being transparent in decisions, treating all individuals with dignity, admitting mistakes, and correcting them. As my co presenter said, everything we do teaches. This means that actions influence how followers define right and wrong. Building an ethical culture. This is where organizations develop an ethical culture through open moral dialogue, which can be talking about ethics regularly, shared decision making that includes multiple perspectives, recognizing and rewarding ethical actions, not just results. When ethical behavior becomes part of the culture, employees feel empowered and responsible for maintaining integrity. Core ethical values. Transforming leaders embody and promote universal moral ideals such as peace, justice, fairness, liberty, equality, and human welfare and opportunity. These can also be referred to as end goals. Modeling a moral purpose. Leaders influence others most powerfully through their example. Moral leadership is about aligning values with actions. Followers often imitate leaders' behaviors, so ethical modeling sets the moral tone. Ethical leaders often act with honesty, fairness, kindness, respect. Leading by example builds credibility and trust within teams and organizations. Now, this is for the class, a question. In a leadership position, do you believe that you are an ethical leader?
Um, Hi. I haven't been put in much leadership positions, but when I have, I do consider myself an ethical leader.
That's good. Okay, now, as mentioned prior, we now have moral talk, which means naming ethical issues openly. Ethical environments encourage discussion about moral issues and not just silence. Open dialogue about what is right or wrong helps people reflect and grow. The discussion of moral talk normalizes ethical reflection, which is the evaluation of one's own actions, choices, and values against ethical principles and standards. It builds accountability and shared responsibility, as well as encourages ethical awareness among all members. What are some barriers that you think stop people from speaking up when they notice something unethical? If any of you have any responses.
Hi, I would say I think some people are afraid to speak out because they are afraid. Like, for example, they have seen what has happened to others in the past, so they may have heard. For some people, their situation is a bit more delicate, like they have a family to feed, and they know that they would ultimately lose their job. And also, it could destroy their reputation. So I think for a lot of people, it's about wanting to do what's right, but at the same time, grapple, how to say it, like struggling with fear.
Yes, fear is always a very big aspect in speaking out about these matters. Fear of outcomes and consequences. Ethical decision-making models. Ethical choices should be guided by consistent principles. These five core principles, often used in decision-making, are respecting autonomy, which is supporting others' independence and competence, doing no harm or non-maleficence, which is avoiding physical or emotional harm, benefiting others, beneficence, prioritizing the welfare of others, being just or justice, which is ensuring the fairness and equality, being faithful or fidelity, which is maintaining trust and honoring commitments. The newspaper test is a test which consists of asking yourself if you'd be comfortable having your actions publicized. It's a simple ethical check for yourself and your actions. And now I have a short video on these five core principles that I just mentioned.
Many bioethicists have found it helpful to draw on certain basic underlying principles. These principles of autonomy, beneficence, non-maleficence, and justice are broad, and their interpretation and application in particular situations can become very complex and difficult. Autonomy reflects respect for persons. It is the idea that key decisions about a person's life should, if possible, be made by that person, rather than anyone else. The decision of whether a competent adult will receive palliative care rather than so-called heroic measures when battling a fatal disease should be made by the patient, not by someone else. Beneficence means that a physician should strive to do what is best for the health of a patient. It includes the argument that we as a society should arrange for doctors to treat patients with serious illnesses, even if these patients cannot afford treatment. Non-maleficence means that healthcare professionals should strive not to harm patients. For example, doctors should not ordinarily provide treatment in which likely harmful side effects are known to outweigh the likely benefits. Justice calls upon us to do what is fair and equitable. Many argue that in contrast to luxury consumer goods, everyone should receive decent health care, regardless of ability to pay. For instance, new life-saving vaccines should be made available to poor patients as well as wealthy patients. Each of these principles may seem fairly straightforward, but when two or more such considerations compete, interpreting and applying these principles becomes quite complex. For example, if a patient requests a procedure in which the risks outweigh the benefits, how does a physician regard autonomy while upholding his or her commitment to non-maleficence? Striving to fulfill the duty of beneficence can raise questions of justice. In the case of organ transplantation, resources are not just insufficient for best care, they are insufficient to provide everyone with the care necessary to stay alive. How should these resources be allocated? If justice requires a universal health coverage plan, but societal resources are limited, how much ought to be covered? Which priorities ought to be set? How much should society spend on prenatal and early childhood care, and how much on high-end quality palliative and hospice care at the other end of life? Insofar as palliative end-of-life care generally concerns only a relatively short amount of time in a person's life, does that mean that proportionally fewer resources should be expended on such care? Or does the moral significance of how our lives come to their final end warrant an appropriately greater commitment of human and financial resources? How should these and so many other complex questions be answered? We can begin by emphasizing this short list of very basic bioethical principles.
Okay, this video basically showed the 5 core principles being used in real life scenarios. Now we are moving on to leadership in action. True leaders help people recognize and act on their deepest values. James McGregor Burns said in 1978, the leader's fundamental act is to induce people to be aware of their true needs and values so they can move to purposeful actions. Power and morality are intertwined. Ethical power arises when leaders rise above selfish interests to serve and collect goods. This shared moral purpose between leaders and followers drives genuine positive change. Moral purpose in practice. Ethical leaders require daily actions guided by honesty, fairness, and kindness. An example of this being Laura Binkley, who was a student leader. She said, "If people cannot trust you, they will not respect you. Treat everyone equally and lead with your heart." These traits of honesty, fairness, and kindness demonstrate how moral purpose becomes behavior and not just belief. I'm now going to briefly go over key takeaways and what stood out to me the most. Ethical leadership is rooted in centuries of moral philosophy. Transforming leadership integrates ethics, motivation, and shared growth. The moral relationship between leader and followers is reciprocal and transformative. Effective leaders model end values and inspire moral action in others. Ethical behavior in leadership is not only about decisions, it's about building trust, respect, and shared purpose. Culture shapes ethical perspectives, but integrity requires balancing diverse moral outlooks with core universal principles. Ethical behavior is demonstrated through consistent, transparent, and fair actions. And lastly, leaders play a critical role in modeling ethics, encouraging dialogue, and sustaining moral courage within organizations. In conclusion, leading with integrity is a complex process. It includes moral development of an individual, the influence of role models, value-driven leadership, and the organizational environment. Becoming an ethical participant and creating ethical environments is a process that does not happen overnight. Groups and organizations are made up of humans that can and will make mistakes. Leading with integrity often requires raising questions around ethical issues. Right. Leading from the relationship leadership model means leading with moral purpose, empowering others to lead by example, including participants in resolving ethical dilemmas, acting ethically to positively affect the public good, and using a process to approach problems that do not offer clear solutions. Leading with moral purpose is central to the leadership process. Lastly, I have our references, and thank you for paying attention and interacting with our presentation today.